All right, we are live on Facebook. And today what we're going to be doing is giving full credit to Matt Whitaker on this one. He came to me and said, let's do a daily show, a daily mastermind show, talking about what's going on in the world with this coronavirus, the COVID-19 situation. He and I have been studying up on this. We've been cross-talking, trying to figure out the best solutions. So what we're going to be doing is a daily episode of the latest and the greatest of how this is going to affect the residential property management community. And so when we're doing this, we're putting on our respective personal pages, but then we'll share it out to the mastermind groups. And so this is kind of how it's going to roll, gang. Bear with us while we get this thing rolling. I'm going to share this into the other group right now. I'm going to start sharing that right this very second.
Yeah, while you're doing that, I'll say a few things. I think the whole idea is that I'm having all these conversations with Brad. I'm having all these conversations with a number of my other property management friends. And the whole idea is we need to crowdsource all this information together at one spot to help people navigate through, what could be at least the biggest thing that's happened since the Great Recession. So the whole idea is that we're going to try to have guests on and talk to people that are kind of in the know and help you navigate through this, the unknown, so to speak. So
let's get some quick background. Yeah, I appreciate you coming with me the idea. So let's talk background real quick so everybody gets a perspective. So Matt owns gkhouses. He has 2,300 homes in 8 markets.
Yeah, about 2,500 homes. Yep.
Okay, and I own RentWerx in San Antonio and Austin. We manage about 900 single-family homes. And so all of this is a very concerning situation because let's go with the worst case scenario, what if, just to really pucker everybody's backside, is what happens if the tenants don't pay rent? That's got to be the biggest looming question. So Matt, what's your take?
Yeah, so I think that especially that is kind of worst case. I mean, what happens, what is the doomsday scenario? The government potentially could force us as landlords to forgive a month of rent. I've heard somewhere from a friend of mine that France may be doing the same thing, where they basically force a landlord to forgive a month of rent. And what happens? What can we sustain essentially a whole month without management fees? Now we could still charge those to the owners, but from a cash flow perspective, do you have to proactively go out and collect that? Is that going to force the owner to be frustrated with us because they're taking this hit and they're going to have to give us money too? Now that would have to be in conjunction with somebody giving up, the banks being willing to give up a mortgage payment too. Now, I think that's a doomsday scenario. I don't think it's super likely, but it is a possibility.
So we're already starting to see, and you're the same way, we talked about this earlier, is we're starting to see a number of tenants already approach us and say, hey, we can't pay rent, even though this thing is like minutes old. I mean, this week is like really turned the corner. From the end of last week to now, here we are on St. Patty's Day, Tuesday, March 17th. And it's all of a sudden just gotten crazy, with bars and restaurants shutting down. Obviously, what's going on in the travel world. And then all of a sudden, people with bars and restaurants being shut down, people can't have jobs, they don't have their tips. And so it's really going to create this negative spiral until we end up, flattening the curve or making the curve go down, as they say. Because right now we're in the upward spiral. And we don't know how bad it's going to be. We don't know how long it's going to be. And we don't know how many of our tenants are going to be affected. So a couple points to bring into this. I mean, you and I would express some frustration to say that, okay, if tenants are already coming to us right now and saying they can't pay April's rent, which is, 13 days away, how are we supposed to react? Are we supposed to be, oh, I'm sorry, we can't, you can't pay rent? I mean, how are we supposed to react to that?
Yeah.
So let's talk through this.
Yeah, I think you have to be really careful navigating this. I mean, the last thing you want to do is come across as kind of the cold, heartless landlord. But you also need to be resourceful and helpful. So one of the things we've done is created a webpage, a coronavirus webpage, where we're trying to be helpful to residents. We haven't launched it yet because we want to get the messaging exactly right, because you don't want to be that, hey, you're going to have to pay the rent April 1st regardless, and here are a few resources that should help you. We want to be, hey, we're in this together. We want you to pay the rent so that we can make our money, and the owner. I mean, everybody needs to, we kind of all are in this thing together. And what are some resources we can help you reach out to pay rent at the beginning of the month?
So I just saw a post from Duke Dotson about Virginia, And I guess they're opening the floodgates for unemployment. And so if somebody can't pay rent because of losing any, tips or wages or even a layoff, or, let's say an industry completely goes away, they should be filing for unemployment immediately. One of the frustrating things that we saw today, and this forum is going to be meant for landlords, but we have to be aware that I'm sure tenants are going to see this. People outside of the landlord forums are going to see this because we're property managers and we're landlords. We both own rental properties. But the problem that we're seeing already is people with paying jobs. Like we've seen a couple military folks come to us and say they can't pay rent. And my reaction as prior military is like, look, you're already getting a housing allowance. You are getting a housing allowance. So the government is giving you money already. You should be putting that money aside to be paying rent, regardless of what the economic situation is outside of that. You're getting a housing allowance. And typically it's almost a dollar for dollar as far as the market to get a 4-bedroom home says it's $1,800, and your BAH is your base allowance for housing is going to be $1,800. I mean, it's almost 1 for 1 because I've been there, done that. And so that's a frustrating point. Now, the other frustrating side is, we have to take, Matt, you'll back me up on this. We have to take the policy that we are maintaining the policy, right? To be in compliance with fair housing laws. We can't deviate willy-nilly. We have to abide by what's in writing to be fair to everybody. And I know that seems cold-hearted, but we're mandated by the fair housing guidelines to do that. Now, if you have a particular case in writing, or excuse me, let's say part of your policy is that you can give to whatever you want or however you want, you can do that. But you also, part of our challenge, Matt, is what if an owner says that they want you to forego any sort of rent collection for the month of April, the month of May, or beyond? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we've actually already had an owner reach out and do this. Now, he was gracious enough to say, I'm still going to pay you your management fee. I realize that it's not your fault, but we've already had an owner do this. So I think it's entirely possible that this happens. I think the biggest challenge is it's not that these people are not going to go get a job. I mean, it's not like the deadbeat unemployed person. I mean, this is happening to some very great tenants, right? It's just a short-term, hopefully short-term cash flow problem. And so how are we going to, as a country, really, because I mean, at the heart of it, after food, I mean, housing's the basic need. At the heart of it, as a country, how are we going to, deal with this short-term cash flow issue? Now, I've heard Mitt Romney said he's going to try to send everybody $1,000. Now, I don't think that's going to necessarily happen, but I also don't think that's necessarily going to help, right? That's not going to pay the rent on most of these homes that we're talking about here. And if they did have the money, it would probably go towards necessities like food. So, we're kind of in this short-term cash flow crunch. And so the whole idea of this is that we're all going to try to navigate this thing together. The whole idea of our pop-up show, so to speak.
So when you talk cash flow, that's talking the business, right?
Well, I'm talking, tenant cash flow.
Tenant,
which ends up being gkhouses' problem too, right? I mean, I'm going to have an increase probably in collections, which means an increase in labor. So I'm going to have an increase in expenses, a decrease in revenue. And how am I going to weigh that as a company to get through this kind of rough patch?
It's an A to Z situation. So if the tenants can't pay rent, they can't pay rent, which means we cannot charge a management fee, potentially, or there may not be money there to charge a management fee, which means we can't pay our staff, which means we can't pay our bills as a company. So it just really spirals in a negative fashion. So I'm hoping that people can go and file unemployment very quickly if they have to. And if they do open the floodgates, which I think is really smart on the feds to do that, at least there's some filter. Like the Mitt Romney plan of just sending $1,000 to everybody, not going to help.
Yeah.
They're going to spend it on stupid things. I mean, it's just not going to be not a wise decision. And that's going to cost way more than having a filter in an unemployment situation. At least they have the infrastructure to say, you get funds, you get this amount, and it's going to last for this long. Unemployment can last for 6 months in some states. So I think we'll get through it by that point.
And I don't want you and I to come across as alarmists, but I think as company owners, we need to be cognizant of the fact that this is a real possibility, and we need to start making decisions on, March 17th when we're shooting this about how we're going to handle these situations when they unfold. And certainly we're going to know more in 2 weeks, but I don't want this to come across as us being alarmist. It really needs to be us being realist about our current situation. I mean, who would have thought on March 1st when we were at your mastermind conference that literally a month later we could be talking about a systemic, I mean, literally GK houses, we're kind of estimating somewhere around 30% of our portfolio may have a challenge paying rent next month. And so it's really kind of crazy times. I just got off the phone with one of my best friends who's one of the smartest people I know, and he just can't, he lives in Boulder, and his comment was literally half the restaurants in Boulder right now are bankrupt. Like they closed them down for 4 weeks. At least half of those restaurants, I know for a fact, have to be living, month to month. And so literally all of those restaurants are bankrupt. And so we're living in a time that is pretty crazy. And so that's the whole idea of us kind of connecting on a daily basis, seeing if we can't weigh this thing through crowdsourcing, because the big apartment communities are crowdsourcing their information. All of these like organizations are crowdsourcing, and your mastermind platform I thought would be a great way for us to kind of crowdsource and find resources and best practices, and even going back to messaging to tenants. What's the best message to tenant? I'm not sure I have it yet, but would love to kind of collectively message this thing to all of our residents.
Well, that could be one of those things too. Do we message them at all? Because if we open the door to say it's okay at some fashion to not pay rent, are we really doing our owners a disservice?
Yeah.
The owners hired us to be the bad guys. Okay, let's all address that and be honest about it. They hired us to do the rent collection. They hired us to find good tenants. They hired us to enforce the lease agreement. So if we start to break on that, we're not doing our jobs for the owners that hired us.
Right.
All right, let's put that aside for a minute. Let's talk the other big question going on is, do we work from home? Do we allow our team members to do remote work, as far as the workload there? I mean, there's a lot of discussions going on about that. Now, RentWerx in San Antonio, we've reduced hours. We have not gone to a virtual workplace yet. It potentially might be on the table, but then there's talk of this thing being airborne. So what good is that going to do?
Yeah.
Right? If this is an airborne virus, if you go to the grocery store one time, you've got it. So does it matter if we work from home or don't work from home? I mean, who knows? I don't know. I mean, that's the other thing we don't know the answers to, but let's talk about it.
Yeah, so GK houses, we've gone to all remote working. I think our biggest issue is maintenance team members, and we can talk about that in a minute, but we have gone to an all remote workforce. I've been pushing out content on how best to do that, best practices for doing that, starting your day at a certain time, ending your day at a certain time, finding a place to work. So we're pushing out content to our team members that we're here in the office. I'm here by myself now. And now they're find themselves at home working, and they've never done that before. So how do you make sure you keep the business consistency of the business going when there's not the accountability of being in the office? And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, certainly we can watch our metrics, but those things take sometimes weeks to manifest themselves in terms of response times, and it's just really a new challenge that we've got to navigate.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's some silver lining to this as we're starting to see the events in China kind of curtail themselves. So maybe it's run its course there. So we may have a similar model to follow, but what's really dang scary is the Fed's coming in and saying, all the restaurants are going to be closed, all the bars are going to be closed, no church gatherings, no events bigger than 10 people I've heard, 200 people. Lubbock was 200 people today, and 10 people here in Austin and San Antonio. It's just all over the board. And we don't know how long this is going to run its course, but going back to one thing you and I talked about earlier is if the tenants don't pay rent, we're going to see some sort of trickle effect. You mentioned it, but let's talk about it a little bit further. The trickle effect being that the feds could come in and tell the banks, they could go tell the banks to put a payment furlough for 60 days, right, for fun, on all the mortgages that are outstanding and due. So if the owners have a break, that could trickle down to the tenants. Now that's not going to help the business. We don't want to necessarily go there.
Yeah,
I don't think there's going to.
we could be the ones left out in that scenario. I mean, that to me is the doomsday scenario.
And if that happens, they're going to open up the SBA loans. They're going to offer some sort of program that we can get into. But I don't think that's going to happen because the banks control the politicians. And so they're never going to want to voluntarily do that. They'll shoot it down in Congress if it were to be some sort of, vote, put to a vote. But if you have,
but let me make the counterpoint to that. I mean, let's say you are a bank and like we know this is a short-term cash flow issue. And you know that you don't want to foreclose on Americans that have been paying consistently, religiously for 5 or 10 years. And you can take those payments and put them on at the end of the loan or do something with it. And it's way cheaper than foreclosing. I mean, it may be in the bank's best interest to do that, which is kind of scary because I was talking to Duke Dodson earlier today and he and I are like, if they do that, and which I think is a real possibility, it would be really bad for us because the property managers end up holding the bag because we basically manage for free because I expect our owners are probably going to want us to forgive those management fees for that month.
Yeah, that would be a real challenge. Now, the other side of that, I lost my train of thought on that one because that may be a case-by-case basis. So what you're talking about with the banks, an individual owner who's going to have to call in about their individual loan and say, what are my options? And the bank, you could do this today. You could do this 2 weeks ago. You could call in and say, I'm having financial hardship. And the bank, maybe, it's up to them, would tack that payment onto the, 361st payment or whatever that's going to be, 30 years. And so maybe they'll do that, but
or
maybe they won't.
It could be just a blanket thing that, hey, you don't have to pay the whole month of April. And they just push that out and everybody knows it happens. And that's one way to flood to basically push cash into the system so that people can survive this. I mean, part of the problem with this is it's happening so fast that people are going to make bad decisions to try to counteract it.
So now that we've talked about the financial ramifications a little bit, probably more than we should, let's really focus on what matters. And that's really protecting us. Protect yourself, protect your family, protect your staff, protect your tenants and your owners. How do we take some steps? Now, we talked about the looming hours and all this other stuff. I mean, let's really focus in on this for a little bit just to kind of narrow that down.
Yeah, I would like to talk about our maintenance team and kind of what we're telling people right now. We still do have maintenance team members going into occupied homes. What we've done is bought them latex gloves. I forget exactly what type they are, but I can certainly post it in the notes. But they're wearing gloves. We're also order them booties because one of the things that I've learned is that somebody coughs, those particles go on the floor. You walk over them, you can actually track them back into your truck. Obviously, you're disposing of those when you leave your home or when you leave that home. Wash your hands with hand sanitizer. So we're buying them hand sanitizer and wipes. We expect them to wipe their truck and van down on a daily basis with disinfecting wipes. And the big thing is we're teaching people, and you just did it, not to touch your face. This is the reason they're suggesting people don't wear masks too, because originally everybody was like, oh, I'm going to wear a mask, but you end up adjusting the mask and touching the mask, and you end up touching your face more and making it even harder. The last thing we're doing is asking our maintenance team members to stay 10 feet away from residents. And we're also pushing this out, that we're doing this out to residents and telling them, hey, we're not, don't think that they're being mean, but we're practicing this social distancing thing. We're asking them to stay away. They're not going to shake your hand. And that we would even love for you to stay in another room while they're taking care of this occupied repair.
Okay, so that's one method, because you're talking about in-home maintenance where you control the technicians, right?
Yes.
That's the left hand. The right hand, a lot of us are doing third-party property management, third-party vendors.
Yeah.
Okay, so in that scenario, we talked about this today with the staff, is that if the tenants are calling about the legitimate work orders and ABC Plumbing Company is voluntarily going over, it's up to the ABC Plumbing Company to take their own precautionary steps to access the home with the tenant.
Yes.
Now, we can't, here's the thing about work orders, right? If they're calling for the work order and they want the work done, they realize that someone's gonna have to come into the home.
Right.
Okay, so if they flat out refuse, we're not going to force the issue.
Right.
Okay, that should be a policy for everybody, whether you have third-party management and or in-home maintenance, third-party vendors, and or in-house vendors or in-house maintenance like you do. So I think that should be the first filter. What do you think about that?
No, I totally agree. I also think that even if you're a third party doing third party maintenance, you need to communicate to the residents to stay away from the vendors, because in the event something did happen, maybe the vendor has some sort of COVID-19, and now all of a sudden they can trace it back to that vendor coming. The last thing, like this social distancing, I think really is the ticket to making sure this thing doesn't become bigger than it really is.
Yeah.
And so I think people should take, as a public service announcement, I think people should take the social distancing thing very seriously. I'm not trying to be an alarmist. I just think I've listened to enough, like all the smart people that are out there that are doing podcasts, and I just heard a great one yesterday. They are saying, look, this is the way that China is doing it. Now, China forces their people to do it. We live in America where it's harder to do that, but that's what's kind of like stretched this thing out in China.
So we're not going to be able to come up with all the answers today, but this is going to be an ongoing episode every day at 4:30 Central Standard Time. Matt and I are going to jump on this Facebook Live. We might end up syndicating it on YouTube. We'll also be able to share it on different pages. That's why we went onto our personal page, because we can share it. You can't put it on a group and then share it. It's just real complicated Facebook stuff. But we're going to be coming on live every day at 4:30 to try and talk about through the issues. I mean, this is changing daily. Dude, it was like, you know, last week in Dallas, you could go to wherever you wanted, and now all of a sudden every single bar and restaurant closed. Okay, so it's a different world out there right now.
And we are crowdsourcing questions and information. So if you have something you'd like us to cover, like us to find out, you know, I sure would love for people to start. I mean, this is a crowdsourced show, so we're trying to figure out what the best practices are. What we want to do is come out on the other side of this. The whole goal is that we're all, you know, might have taken a black eye, but certainly not crushed our whole business.
Sure. All right, everybody, let's talk again tomorrow at 4:30 Central Standard Time. We'll try to bring up the latest and greatest updates that we know it. These issues that we're talking about, we don't have the right answers. We don't have the perfect answers. We're just trying to figure it out together. And so, Matt, I appreciate you coming up with the idea, and let's talk again tomorrow afternoon. You good with that?
Awesome. Thanks, Brad.
All right, thanks, guys.